You want to become the one person an avoidant fears losing? Then listen closely, because this isn't about tricks or tactics. It's about transformation. Yours, not theirs. You don't change someone's attachment style by chasing them, fixing them, or proving your worth. You change the dynamic by becoming someone whose presence rewires the game, because you are that rare. Avoidants run from vulnerability. They see closeness as danger. But what if you showed them something different? What if your strength came from stillness? From not reacting, not retreating, but simply being. They've never seen that before. They expect intensity or withdrawal. You offer them neither. You offer steadiness, certainty, peace. And that peace begins inside you. The truth is, if you don't master your emotions, they will. If you seek validation from someone who fears intimacy, you'll always feel one step behind. But when you know who you are, when your energy no longer dances for their approval, something shifts. Now you're no longer a chaser, you're a mirror. You reflect their hidden longing for safety and their deepest fear of losing it. This isn't about silence or distance. This is about standards. Real ones. Not the kind you scream, but the kind you live. And the kind where you don't settle for half love or breadcrumbs because you've met yourself too deeply to play small anymore. That kind of person, they don't beg to be chosen. They're already chosen. By life, by mission, by purpose. And avoidants, for all their defenses, feel that. They respect that. They crave that stability, even as they run from it. And so you love, but not to be needed. You love freely, but you don't abandon yourself in the process. You offer connection, but you don't demand it. You create warmth, but you don't chase cold. You become the embodiment of secure love, not by reading a script, but by living the truth. You stop reacting to their walls. You stop trying to climb over them. You become the mountain. And suddenly, without words, without threats, they feel something they've never known before. Loss. Not because you've left, but because they realize they can't replace you. They can't duplicate what you offer. You're not just a lover, you're a sanctuary. You're not just someone who understands them, you're someone who sees through them and stays rooted in your own worth. That's power, that's presence, that's transformation. The moment you rise into that version of you, the one who doesn't need to be chosen because you already chose yourself, that's the moment they stop fearing connection and start fearing your absence. Because now they know losing you means losing the one soul who gave them a glimpse of a life they didn't believe they could have. And that they will never forget. Avoidants are wired to be suspicious of emotional expression. To them, vulnerability often equals danger, not connection. They've learned, either through early childhood experiences or past wounds, that emotions lead to overwhelm, to loss of control, to rejection. So when they encounter someone who is reactive, who chases, cries, or clings, they instinctively pull back, not because they don't care, but because it confirms their belief that emotions are unsafe. This is why emotional self-mastery isn't just a virtue around an avoidance. It's the key to everything. When you show up grounded, not seeking to be regulated by them, not flailing for validation, they take notice. You break their pattern. You interrupt their script. Self-mastery means you know your emotional landscape intimately. You feel deeply, but you are not ruled by those feelings. You don't suppress your pain or pretend you're unaffected. You acknowledge it, sit with it, and choose your response consciously. You don't play the blame game. You don't weaponize your needs. You stand in full ownership of your inner world, and that creates gravity. People who fear intimacy are silently drawn to those who make emotion look safe, who make connection look like a choice, not a trap. When you regulate your nervous system, when you can breathe through the tension without reacting to every trigger, you become what they've never had, a sanctuary. You represent the parent they never had, the partner they thought didn't exist. And you do it without chasing, without forcing, without needing. You become rare. Because while the world screams louder, you become the quiet that steadies the storm. This doesn't mean you never express feelings. It means when you do, it comes from clarity, not chaos. You don't need to manipulate them to feel seen. You show up, you express truth with power, and then you let go of the outcome. You aren't emotionally starving. You're emotionally sovereign. And emotional sovereignty is magnetic to someone who doesn't trust their own. In a world of people trying to get something from them, closure, security, labels, love, you become someone who brings something. Instead, peace, wholeness, maturity. The person who doesn't hand over their emotional thermostat is the one who earns their respect. And once they respect you, they start to fear losing you. Because respect builds trust, and trust builds desire. When you master your emotions, you don't just become someone they want, you become someone they need, even if they don't yet know how to say it. This is how you shift the power, not by withholding love, but by deepening your center. When you become someone whose happiness doesn't depend on their response, their mood, or their attention, you become untouchable in the most beautiful way. You become the lighthouse they look for in the fog. You lead by energy, not demand. And that energy, it teaches them quietly, powerfully, that this is what real love feels like. Not a fire to burn in, but a fire to come home to. Avoidants are not wired for emotional chaos. When emotions escalate, they retreat, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and don't know what to do with it. They've often grown up in environments where expressing feelings led to punishment, rejection, or being overwhelmed. So they learned to disconnect from their emotional bodies and shut down rather than speak up. In a relationship, this plays out in withdrawal, coldness, or disappearing acts that feel personal, even cruel. But underneath that distance is a person terrified of being engulfed by emotional demands they were never taught how to meet. In that space, the last thing they need is more emotional intensity. What they unconsciously seek, but rarely expect, is calm, groundedness. Someone who doesn't chase when they run, or explode when they pull away. Someone who can sit in the storm and not become the storm. That's where your power is born. You become the eye of the hurricane, not avoiding emotion, but not amplifying it either. You stand in stillness, not because you're detached, but because you've built emotional muscles strong enough to carry peace in the presence of panic. This is not passive silence or emotional neglect. It's the deliberate choice to not match chaos with chaos. It's to make, not to push on with chaos. When they shut down, your nervous system doesn't have to. When they distance, you don't have to panic. You regulate, breathe, and stay steady, not to control them, but to anchor yourself. You're not trying to fix their behavior. You're demonstrating through your own state what emotional safety looks like. And that is revolutionary to someone who has never had it. Avoidants are used to people taking their distance personally, pressuring them to open up, punishing them for retreating, or chasing them with anxious energy. But when you become the calm in their storm, something in them hesitates. Their old patterns don't work anymore. They're drawn to you, not because you give them space, but because you give that space a different meaning. You're not abandoning them. You're not demanding from them. You're allowing them the dignity of choice while standing in the truth of your own worth. Over time, this rewires how they associate closeness. Instead of panic, they begin to feel curiosity. Instead of danger, they begin to sense safety. Because you are not emotionally reactive, they don't have to protect themselves from your reactions. And in that quiet space, connection begins to grow. Slowly, subtly, but undeniably. You're not proving anything. You're not performing for approval. You're simply offering a grounded presence that says, I don't need to be rescued from my own emotions, and I won't try to rescue you from yours either. And that, paradoxically, is what brings them closer, because the one who doesn't demand closeness becomes the only one they feel safe enough to get close to. When your energy becomes a refuge rather than a risk, the avoidant no longer run. They rest, not because you forced them to, but because your calm became louder than their fear. Avoidants are allergic to control. The moment they feel someone is trying to dominate their emotional space or demand closeness on a timeline, their defenses rise. They've been conditioned, often since childhood, to believe that love equals obligation, that intimacy means losing themselves, and that relationships are traps in disguise. So when they sense ultimatums, manipulation, or emotional pressure, they don't lean in, they shut down. But here's the paradox. Avoidants are not repelled by standards, they are repelled by control. There's a critical difference, and understanding it is the key to earning not only their attention, but their long-term respect. Ultimatums are fear-based. They come from a place of scarcity. Do this, or I'm gone. They carry an edge of desperation, often used to force a result, but standards are rooted in self-worth. They don't require loud words or emotional threats. They speak through action, not emotion. When you set a standard, you're not controlling someone else's behavior. You're defining the kind of treatment you will accept, and you're willing to walk away in peace if it's not met. That energy is powerful. It doesn't chase. It doesn't punish. It simply is. Avoidants deeply respect people who honor themselves. They may not show it at first. They might test your boundaries, but beneath their distancing behaviors is a radar finely tuned to emotional integrity. When you remain consistent in your values, when you don't waver or compromise what matters to you just to keep them around, they notice. And when you live by those standards with calmness, not anger or reactivity, you become someone they fear losing because you represent something they don't even trust in themselves: stability. To live with high standards around an avoidant doesn't mean issuing constant rules or withdrawing love as a punishment. It means being honest about what you need while remaining deeply anchored in your own emotional ecosystem. It means saying, I won't chase, but I also won't shrink. I won't beg, but I also won't settle. I care, but I care about me too. That balance is magnetic because it shows that your love is not a transaction. It's a reflection of your wholeness. You must be willing to lose the connection to preserve your dignity. That's not cruelty, it's clarity. And when you lead with clarity instead of chaos, you disrupt their expectations. They're used to people either tolerating their distance indefinitely or forcing connection through emotional outbursts. But when you offer warmth without neediness and boundaries without drama, they don't feel cornered, they feel respected. And in that respect, the seed of desire grows. You don't need to tell an avoidant, if you don't commit, I'm gone. You simply need to live in a way where your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. When they realize that your love is not endless in the face of neglect, but deeply available to those who show up with intention, they begin to understand that you're not trying to trap them, you're inviting them into something rare. And that invitation, delivered without pressure, becomes the very thing they fear losing most. Avoidants aren't drawn to intensity, they're drawn to safety. But the challenge is that they don't recognize safety when it's right in front of them because their nervous systems are conditioned to equate intimacy with loss of control. So when someone comes on too strong, demands closeness, or forces emotional engagement, it only reinforces their fear that relationships are pressure cookers, not sanctuaries. The key is to show them a different way, not through words or force, but through consistent emotional presence that doesn't seek to own or overwhelm them. You don't push an avoidant into intimacy. You don't pressure them to talk, open up, or declare their feelings. That energy may come from a good place, but to them, it feels invasive. What you do instead is model intimacy not as something that needs to be chased or earned, but as something that simply exists between two emotionally grounded people. You demonstrate through action and tone that closeness can be peaceful, not threatening. That connection can coexist with space. That you're not here to trap them, you're here to invite them into something deeper. This means you allow space without pulling away. You remain available without becoming emotionally dependent. When they retreat, you don't punish them with silence or chase them with anxiety. You hold steady. You let the relationship breathe. And in doing so, you offer the avoidant something they've never experienced: freedom within connection. They expect that intimacy comes with a cost: losing autonomy, being consumed, having no escape. But when you show them that your love doesn't suffocate, that it doesn't demand emotional payment in return, you begin to soften the part of them that's always ready to bolt. Patience becomes your superpower. You understand that real intimacy is built in small, quiet moments, not grand gestures or emotionally charged conversations. You let things unfold naturally without trying to control the pace. You accept the moment without trying to manipulate the future. And most importantly, you don't hinge your sense of worth on how fast they open up. You bring your whole self to the table, but you don't require them to match it immediately. That restraint is rare, and it's what allows avoidance to slowly step toward you, not out of pressure, but out of genuine trust. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. S is for safety. It's a pause on a bear. Repeated experiences of safety, of being seen and not pushed, start to chip away at the avoidance armor. They begin to associate you with something unfamiliar. Relief. The pressure is gone. The expectation is replaced with invitation. The fear of being controlled is replaced by the experience of being understood. When intimacy becomes something they want instead of something they have to manage, the shift begins. You become the exception to their rule, the one who showed them that closeness doesn't mean surrendering freedom, but discovering a deeper kind of freedom through connection. And that, to an avoidant, is unforgettable, because you didn't force them to feel safe. You simply were safe. And that experience, more than any conversation or promise, is what teaches them how to love. Avoidants don't fear losing people who need them. They fear losing people who don't. That's the truth no one talks about. When someone's life is already full, rich with purpose, grounded in vision, driven by mission, it sends a signal to the avoidant mind. This person doesn't need me to survive. They want me, but they don't need me. That distinction makes all the difference. Because while avoidants pull away from people who chase them for love, they're drawn toward people who radiate self-sufficiency, depth, and intention. Someone with gravity, someone unforgettable. Purpose creates gravity. It gives your presence, weight, meaning, energy. When you're clear on your path, when your days are shaped by passion and direction, you become hard to walk away from. Because you're not trying to fill your emptiness with someone else. You've already filled it with your mission. And people who have healed themselves enough to become mission-driven are magnetic. Because they're no longer looking to be completed. They're offering overflow. That kind of person doesn't just attract partners, they inspire them. Avoidants often fear being consumed by someone else's emotional needs. But when you show up with vision, when you have dreams, goals, and principles that drive you forward, they don't see a burden. They see a standard. You become the mirror of who they could be if they stopped running from themselves. That's not something you tell them directly, something they feel. And that feeling, over time, becomes respect. It becomes admiration. It becomes fear, not fear of you, but fear of what it would mean to lose access to the kind of rare energy you bring. When your life is meaningful without them, they realize they don't complete you, they complement you. And that shift in dynamic is powerful because now you're not orbiting around them, you're walking your own path. And the only way they get to walk with you is if they rise. You don't demand they rise, you just keep moving. And eventually, if the connection matters, they'll have to choose. Stay frozen in their fears or evolve into the kind of person worthy of the space you've created. Purpose also protects you. It keeps you from collapsing into codependency. When you're guided by something larger than a relationship, you don't get derailed by every push or pull. You're too busy building, growing, serving, and that consistency, the ability to stay emotionally available, but never emotionally dependent, is what builds irresistible value in the eyes of someone who's used to being the one in control. Now they see someone who won't chase, won't beg, won't crumble, someone who shows up fully but on purpose. And when you walk like that, when you carry yourself like someone with nothing to prove but everything to offer, you become the one they never stop thinking about. Because in a world of people trying to get something from them, you became the one who didn't need them to feel whole. You became the one they couldn't replace. You became the one they quietly feared losing because you reminded them of everything they want to be but haven't yet dared to become. Most people think that loving harder will earn them a place in someone's life, but when it comes to an avoidant, the opposite is often true. The more you lose yourself in loving them, the less safe they feel. Because whether they admit it or not, avoidants are hyper-attuned to emotional pressure. When you make them the center of your world, they feel trapped, even if you mean well. But when you love without losing yourself, something extraordinary happens. You show them what real love is. A love that doesn't suffocate. A love that doesn't need to control. A love that offers space and connection. To love an avoidant effectively, you must be anchored. You have to be so deeply rooted in who you are that your love flows from you, not in search of completion, but as an expression of wholeness. You are not trying to be their missing piece. You are not molding yourself to fit their comfort zones. You're showing up fully emotionally available, but not emotionally dependent. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything because now they feel your presence without feeling your weight. They feel your warmth without fearing your expectations. When you stay true to yourself, your needs, your dreams, your values, you become trustworthy, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. You don't twist yourself into someone you think they'll love. You love from a place of clarity. You know what you bring to the table. You know what you won't accept. You're willing to give, but not to the point of self-betrayal. And that kind of love, calm, grounded, sovereign, becomes something they don't want to live without. Avoidants are used to people giving too much or demanding too much. They're used to emotional chaos, highs and lows. People who collapse their boundaries in the name of intimacy. But when they meet someone who says, I love you, but I won't lose me to keep you, it shakes them. Not in a dramatic way, in a deep, quiet, unforgettable way. It redefines what love can look like. You don't need to abandon your emotions to be strong. You just need to be in a relationship with your emotions that doesn't rely on someone else to regulate them. When you feel sad, you hold space for it. When you feel joy, you share it. But not to get attention, not to fix them, not to make them change. Your emotional world is not a performance. It's an offering. You invite them in, but you never force them. That's the power of staying connected to yourself. Over time, your consistency becomes magnetic. Your love becomes the one thing that doesn't demand, doesn't chase, doesn't abandon. It simply is. And in a world where everyone wants something, where connection often comes with hidden contracts and silent expectations, your love becomes rare. It becomes a place where they can finally rest. Not because you gave them everything, but because you gave them the one thing they never had, the experience of being loved by someone who never lost themselves in the process. And so if you truly want to become the one person an avoidant fears losing, it starts with becoming someone who doesn't lose themselves. You don't earn their heart by pushing, proving, or pleading. You earn their trust by embodying something they've never known. Emotional strength without control, intimacy without pressure, love without neediness. You become the safe place they never believed existed. And in doing so, you don't just change the relationship, you change the rules. You become unforgettable, not because you tried to be, but because you became the mirror of everything they secretly long for and everything they never thought they could keep. Thank you for showing up with your whole heart. Thank you for being willing to grow, to love wiser, and to rise into the version of yourself that doesn't just attract deep connection, but sustains it. The world needs more of this love. The kind that doesn't break under pressure, the kind that doesn't bend to fear, the kind that leads with truth. Keep going. You're becoming someone rare. And someone out there is about to realize they can't afford to lose you.